The divorce from Vanessa was finalized in February, and while losing the house and half our savings hurt, nothing compared to the custody arrangement that gave her primary custody of our 7-year-old son Dylan, with me getting every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. I had fought hard for 50-50 custody, believing Dylan needed his father equally in his life. But Vanessa's attorney painted me as the workaholic engineer who was never home, while she was the devoted mother who had sacrificed her career advancement to be present for our son. The judge bought her narrative, and I walked out of that courtroom knowing I had lost daily access to the person I loved most in the world. The child support order was steep, given $800 per month, but I paid it gladly because it was for Dylan, and I would have paid double if it meant he was taken care of properly. What killed me was the alimony on top of it. $2,400 per month for 5 years, because Vanessa claimed she had stunted her HR career to be a stay-at-home mother for 3 years when Dylan was a toddler. Between child support, alimony, and my own living expenses, I was barely surviving on what was left of my $140,000 engineering salary. I tried to make the most of my limited time with Dylan, planning activities for our Wednesday dinners and weekend visits that would create good memories despite the divorce. He was a bright, energetic kid who loved building things with Legos, playing soccer, and asking endless questions about how bridges and buildings were designed. During our time together, he seemed happy and well-adjusted, adapting to the new reality of 2 households with the resilience that kids somehow manage. Vanessa and I maintained cold but functional communication through a co-parenting app, coordinating schedules and sharing updates about Dylan's school and activities. I hated her for what she had done to our family, the affair that ended our marriage, the custody battle that limited my time with my son. But I kept my anger contained and focused on being the best father I could be during the limited hours I was allowed. Those Wednesday evenings and alternate weekends were everything to me, and I lived for Dylan's excitement when I picked him up, the way he would run to my car yelling, "Dad!" like he hadn't seen me in months, even though it had only been a few days. Everything changed in month 8 when I received legal notice that Vanessa was filing a motion to modify both child support and spousal support, demanding increases to $3,500 and $3,800 respectively, nearly double what I was already paying. My stomach dropped as I read the justification. Dylan had been diagnosed with severe ADHD, sensory processing disorder, and anxiety that required intensive therapy, specialized tutoring, and potentially medication management. Attached to the motion was a comprehensive psychological evaluation from Dr. Patricia Westmore, a licensed clinical psychologist detailing Dylan's supposed struggles with focus, emotional regulation, sensory sensitivities, and social anxiety that were significantly impacting his ability to function at school and at home. The report recommended immediate intervention, including twice-weekly occupational therapy, weekly psychological counseling, executive function coaching, and enrollment in a specialized private school program that cost $24,000 annually. Vanessa's attorney argued that these unexpected medical needs created extraordinary expenses that required substantially increased support from me, and that my son's well-being depended on my ability to fund his treatment. I sat in my apartment, staring at this evaluation in complete shock and confusion, because the kid I saw every week showed absolutely no signs of these severe problems. Dylan was energetic but not hyperactive, focused enough to build complex Lego sets for hours, socially confident with friends, and doing well in his regular public school according to every report card and teacher conference I had attended. I called Vanessa immediately, my voice shaking with concern and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me Dylan was having these problems? Why am I finding out through a court filing that our son has been diagnosed with serious disorders?" There was a pause before she responded in that patient tone she used when she wanted to make me feel stupid. "I tried to tell you, Nathan, but you're so focused on your own life and your anger about the divorce that you don't pay attention to what's actually going on with Dylan. I've been dealing with this alone for months, taking him to appointments, watching him struggle, trying to get him help while you show up twice a week and play fun dad without seeing the real challenges." Her words made me feel guilty and defensive, exactly as she intended. "What are you talking about? He seems completely fine when he's with me. He focuses. He plays normally. His teachers say he's doing great. Are you sure this diagnosis is accurate?" I heard the sharpness enter her voice. "Are you seriously questioning a professional evaluation from a licensed psychologist? Are you going to deny your son the treatment he needs because you don't want to pay more support? That's really low, Nathan. Even for you." She hung up before I could respond, and I was left holding my phone, torn between worry about Dylan and suspicion that something about this didn't add up. That weekend when I picked up Dylan for my scheduled visit, I watched him carefully for any signs of the severe problems described in the evaluation. He ran to the car with his usual enthusiasm, talked excitedly about his soccer game, spent 2 hours building an elaborate Lego spaceship with complete focus and patience, ate dinner without any of the sensory issues the report mentioned, and went to bed at his normal time without the anxiety or emotional dysregulation that supposedly plagued him. I asked gentle questions about school and how he was feeling, and he seemed genuinely confused by my concern. "I'm fine, Dad. Why do you keep asking if I'm okay?" On Sunday morning, I took him to the park where he played confidently with other kids, showing none of the social anxiety or sensory overwhelm described in the evaluation. By the time I dropped him back at Vanessa's house, I was certain something was wrong with this diagnosis. Either Dylan was somehow completely different when he was with his mother versus with me, which seemed impossible, or the evaluation was inaccurate or exaggerated or worse. I made an appointment with an attorney, not my original divorce lawyer who had failed to get me fair custody, but someone new who came highly recommended for fighting fraudulent support modifications. Jennifer Chen met with me 2 days later, and after I showed her the evaluation and described Dylan's actual behavior, her eyes narrowed. "This sounds like a cash grab using your son as justification. We need to investigate this evaluation very carefully, because if your ex-wife is lying about your son's mental health to extract more money from you, we're going to expose it and make sure she faces consequences. Are you ready to fight for your son and your financial survival?" I looked at her with determination I hadn't felt since before the divorce. "I'm ready." Jennifer Chen moved quickly and methodically, her first step being to request Dylan's complete medical and educational records through legal discovery to verify whether the psychological evaluation matched any other professional observations about his behavior and functioning. What we discovered over the next 2 weeks was shocking in its implications. Dylan's school records showed consistently positive performance with no behavioral concerns, no academic struggles, and teacher comments describing him as focused, well-behaved, and socially engaged with peers. His pediatrician's records showed routine well-child visits with no developmental concerns ever noted, no referrals to specialists, and no indication that Vanessa had ever mentioned worrying about ADHD, anxiety, or sensory issues during any appointment. There was a single notation from 3 months ago where Vanessa had asked the pediatrician about ADHD screening. But the doctor had noted that based on parent questionnaire and clinical observation during the visit, Dylan showed no signs meeting diagnostic criteria and no further evaluation was recommended. The disconnect between this clean medical and educational history and the severe diagnoses claimed in Dr. Westmore's evaluation was glaring and suspicious. Jennifer's next move was to contact Dr. Westmore directly through official legal channels, requesting verification of the evaluation and asking for her complete clinical notes and testing protocols used to reach her diagnostic conclusions. The response came back within days and changed everything. Dr. Patricia Westmore had never evaluated Dylan, had never met Vanessa or any child by that name, and definitely had never produced the psychological report attached to Vanessa's support modification motion. "This is fraud," Jennifer told me during an emergency meeting, her voice carrying both anger and excitement about the clear evidence we now had. "Your ex-wife forged an entire psychological evaluation, probably using templates she found online and slapping a real psychologist's name on it to make it look legitimate. She gambled that you wouldn't question it, and that the court would just accept it as valid and grant her request for more money. What she didn't count on was us actually investigating." Jennifer pulled out the forged document and pointed to several details. "Look at the signature here. It doesn't match Dr. Westmore's actual signature that we got from the state licensing board. The formatting is wrong for how psychological evaluations are typically structured, and most damning, the document metadata shows it was created on a computer registered to Vanessa Rodriguez, your ex-wife, not on Dr. Westmore's professional systems. The full scope of Vanessa's deception became clearer as Jennifer continued investigating. We discovered that Vanessa had researched how much various therapeutic interventions and special education programs cost, clearly calculating how much she could claim Dylan needed to maximize her support increase. She had probably chosen ADHD and sensory processing disorder specifically because they're subjective diagnoses without clear biological markers, making them harder to definitively disprove than something like a broken bone or measurable learning disability. The private school she claimed was necessary for Dylan's needs was actually a prestigious academy she had toured months earlier, according to their admissions office, back before any supposed diagnosis, suggesting she wanted him there for status reasons and was now using fake medical necessity to make me pay for it. Jennifer also discovered that Vanessa had been complaining to friends and family about money being tight and her wanting a better lifestyle. And one mutual acquaintance came forward to say Vanessa had openly discussed trying to get more support from me by claiming Dylan had special needs. The evidence of deliberate, calculated fraud was overwhelming and infuriating. I felt a complex storm of emotions processing all of this. Rage at Vanessa for being willing to falsely label our healthy son as disordered just to get more money from me. Fear about what this fraud attempt meant about her character and judgment as Dylan's primary custodial parent, and grim determination to make sure she faced full consequences for what she had tried to do. What happens now? I asked Jennifer. We file an emergency motion to not only deny her modification request, but to hold her in contempt of court for submitting fraudulent evidence, request sanctions including her paying our legal fees, and most importantly, we file for full custody of Dylan based on her demonstrated willingness to harm his well-being for financial gain, Jennifer explained, her tone serious. A mother who would fake mental health diagnoses for her child to get more money is not someone who should have primary custody. The family court takes this kind of fraud very seriously, especially when it involves falsely labeling a child with disorders he doesn't have. We're going to destroy her credibility and fight for your son. The hearing was scheduled for 5 weeks out, and Jennifer warned me that Vanessa would likely try to explain it away or claim misunderstanding, but that the evidence was clear enough that we had a strong case. I had to continue the pretense of normal co-parenting during those 5 weeks while knowing what Vanessa had done. Watching her drop Dylan off for my visits with a smile on her face, like she hadn't just tried to defraud me and harm our son's future with false diagnoses. Every interaction was torture, biting my tongue when she made small talk about Dylan's day, resisting the urge to confront her about the fraud because Jennifer had warned me to let it play out in court where it would have maximum legal impact. I spent extra time with Dylan during those weeks, documenting his completely normal behavior, taking videos of him playing happily and focusing well on activities, building evidence that would show any judge that this child clearly didn't have the severe problems his mother had claimed. Dylan asked me once why I was recording him so much, and I told him I just wanted to remember our fun times together, which was true even if it wasn't the complete truth. Those 5 weeks felt endless. A combination of anxiety about the upcoming hearing, rage at what Vanessa had attempted, and fierce determination to protect my son from a mother who had proven she would exploit him for money. The day before the hearing, Jennifer called with final preparations. Tomorrow, we're going to expose your ex-wife's fraud in front of a judge, prove she forged a psychological evaluation, and fight for your son's custody and your financial freedom. Are you ready? I had never been more ready for anything in my life. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, a windowless space with fluorescent lighting that made everything feel sterile and oppressive as we waited for the judge to enter. Vanessa sat at the opposite table with her attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who kept whispering things to her that made her nod seriously like they were discussing legitimate legal strategy rather than trying to defend obvious fraud. She looked confident, almost smug, dressed professionally in a way that projected responsible single mother rather than someone who had forged legal documents to steal from her ex-husband. Jennifer sat next to me reviewing her notes, occasionally pointing out details in our evidence binders, and I tried to calm my racing heart by focusing on the fact that we had truth and documentation on our side. When the judge entered, a stern-looking woman in her late 50s named Judge Patricia Morrison, everyone stood, and I felt the weight of what was about to happen settle over me like physical pressure. This hearing would determine whether Vanessa got away with her fraud or faced consequences, whether I would be forced to pay inflated support based on lies or get justice and potentially custody of my son. Judge Morrison called the case and asked Vanessa's attorney to present his client's motion for support modification first, giving him the floor to make his argument. He stood smoothly and launched into a rehearsed speech about Dylan's unexpected special needs, the financial burden of necessary therapies and specialized education, and how a loving father should want to provide adequately for his struggling child's medical requirements. Your Honor, the psychological evaluation from Dr. Patricia Westmore clearly documents severe ADHD, sensory processing disorder, and anxiety that require immediate and ongoing intervention, he said, holding up the forged document like it was holy scripture. Ms. Rodriguez has been struggling alone to meet these needs, while Mr. Hayes has been resistant to acknowledging his son's diagnosis and resistant to providing the increased support necessary for proper treatment. We're asking the court to order support increases that will allow Dylan to receive the care he desperately needs. I watched Vanessa dab at her eyes with tissue during this performance, playing the struggling mother role perfectly, and I felt my hands clench into fists under the table at the audacity of this theater. Jennifer squeezed my arm in warning to stay calm and let her handle this. When Vanessa's attorney finished and sat down looking satisfied with his presentation, Judge Morrison turned to Jennifer with a neutral expression that gave nothing away about her thoughts. Ms. Chen, you filed an opposition to this motion along with some serious allegations about the evidence submitted. Please present your response. Jennifer stood and her demeanor was completely different from the smooth performance we had just witnessed. She was direct, factual, and carried an edge of righteous anger that made even me sit up straighter. Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of a father refusing to support his child's legitimate needs. What we have is deliberate fraud, document forgery, and perjury committed by Ms. Rodriguez in an attempt to extract money from my client under false pretenses. She pulled out our evidence binder and approached the bench. The psychological evaluation submitted by Ms. Rodriguez, claiming to be from Dr. Patricia Westmore, is a complete fabrication. Dr. Westmore has provided a sworn statement that she never evaluated the child in question, never met Ms. Rodriguez, and never produced this document. Judge Morrison's expression shifted from neutral to intensely focused as she took the document and Dr. Westmore's statement. Jennifer continued without mercy, laying out each piece of evidence systematically while Vanessa's face went progressively paler and her attorney started shuffling papers nervously. The signature on this evaluation doesn't match Dr. Westmore's actual signature on file with the state licensing board, as confirmed by forensic analysis. The document metadata shows it was created on a computer registered to Ms. Rodriguez, not Dr. Westmore's professional systems. Furthermore, Dylan's actual school records and pediatric medical records show no evidence of the severe disorders claimed in this fake evaluation. His teachers describe him as focused and well-adjusted. His pediatrician noted no developmental concerns and specifically declined to refer for ADHD evaluation 3 months ago. She pulled out still photos taken from videos of Dylan during my recent visits. Your Honor, this is the child Ms. Rodriguez claims has severe ADHD and sensory processing disorder. Building complex Lego sets with sustained focus for over an hour, playing soccer without sensory overwhelm, interacting confidently with peers without the social anxiety described in the fake evaluation. Ms. Rodriguez has fabricated a mental health crisis for her healthy son in order to fraudulently increase support payments, and we're requesting the court hold her in contempt and consider modifying custody arrangements given her willingness to harm the child's reputation and future by falsely labeling him as disordered. Judge Morrison looked up from the documents, her expression having transformed from neutral to barely contained fury, and when she spoke, her voice carried steel that made everyone in the courtroom tense. Ms. Rodriguez, did you create this psychological evaluation yourself? Vanessa stood shakily, her confident demeanor completely shattered, and started to stammer a response about misunderstandings and consulting with professionals informally. The judge cut her off sharply. That's a yes or no question. Did you create this document and falsely attribute it to Dr. Westmore? Vanessa's attorney tried to intervene with legal language about Fifth Amendment rights and needing time to consult, but Judge Morrison wasn't having it. Your client submitted this document to my court as evidence in a legal proceeding. I am now asking her directly whether she fabricated it. Answer the question, Ms. Rodriguez. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes before Vanessa whispered, "Yes." The single word hung in the air like a confession of murder, and I watched Vanessa's entire case and credibility collapse in real time. Judge Morrison's next words were delivered with cold precision. This hearing is continued for 1 week while I consider contempt charges and sanctions. Mrs. Rodriguez, you are ordered to appear with your attorney to show cause why you should not be held in criminal contempt for perjury and fraud. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down like thunder, and Vanessa burst into tears while her attorney looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The week between the initial hearing and the contempt proceeding was surreal. Watching Vanessa's perfect facade crumble in real time as word spread through our social circles about what she had done. Her own attorney withdrew from representing her, citing ethical conflicts about having unknowingly submitted fraudulent evidence to the court, forcing her to scramble to find new legal representation, willing to take a case where she had already admitted to forging documents. Friends who had supported her during the divorce started distancing themselves, shocked that someone would fabricate mental health diagnoses for their own child just to get more money. I received apologetic calls from people who had believed her narrative about me being a deadbeat dad who didn't care about Dylan's needs, now understanding they had been manipulated by someone willing to lie about anything to get what she wanted. Most importantly, I finally felt vindicated after months of being painted as the villain, finally having proof that I had been telling the truth about her character and manipulations all along. Jennifer warned me not to celebrate yet because we still had to get through the contempt hearing and custody modification process. But for the first time since the divorce started, I felt hope. The contempt hearing brought a different Vanessa to court. Gone was the confident professional woman playing grieving mother, replaced by someone who looked scared and desperate in a cheaper suit with visible stress aging her face. She had found a new attorney, a public defender type who looked overwhelmed by the evidence against his client and was clearly just trying to minimize damage rather than actually defend her actions. Judge Morrison entered with the same stern expression from the previous hearing, and I could tell she had spent the week reviewing everything carefully and was ready to deliver consequences. Ms. Rodriguez, you admitted in my courtroom that you fabricated a psychological evaluation and submitted it as evidence in a legal proceeding, falsely diagnosing your own child with disorders he doesn't have in order to fraudulently increase support payments. Do you understand the severity of what you've done? Vanessa nodded, tears streaming down her face. But Judge Morrison wasn't interested in her tears. You didn't just lie to me and attempt to defraud your ex-husband. You were willing to create a permanent false medical record for your son that could have followed him through his educational and professional life, affecting his opportunities and how he's treated by teachers, coaches, and employers. That level of selfishness and disregard for your child's well-being is unconscionable. Judge Morrison's ruling was comprehensive and devastating for Vanessa in ways that exceeded even my hopes for justice. She was found in criminal contempt of court, sentenced to 30 days in county jail to be served immediately, and ordered to pay $15,000 in sanctions directly to the court for wasting judicial resources with fraudulent filings. The support modification request was denied entirely, and furthermore, my existing alimony obligation was terminated immediately based on her egregious misconduct and breach of the duty of good faith that underlies support agreements. Most importantly, Judge Morrison ordered an immediate temporary change in custody pending a full evaluation, giving me primary physical custody of Dylan, with Vanessa getting supervised visitation twice a week. Ms. Rodriguez has demonstrated that she cannot be trusted to prioritize her son's actual well-being over her own financial interests, and that makes her an unsuitable primary custodial parent at this time, the judge stated while Vanessa sobbed openly. Mr. Hayes will assume primary custody effective immediately, and we will schedule a full custody hearing in 60 days after a court-ordered psychological evaluation of both parents and the child to determine permanent arrangements. I sat there stunned as the ruling kept getting better, barely able to process that I had not only stopped the fraud, but had actually won primary custody of Dylan after months of fighting for more time with my son. Vanessa was taken into custody immediately after the hearing, led out in handcuffs while crying and trying to turn back to look at me like I might somehow intervene to save her from consequences she had brought entirely on herself. Her new attorney looked relieved to be done with the case, and Jennifer was practically glowing with victory as we left the courtroom. That went better than I could have hoped, she told me as we walked to her car. Not only did we stop the fraudulent support increase, we got your alimony terminated and primary custody of Dylan. Judge Morrison doesn't tolerate parents who use children as pawns in financial games, and she made an example of your ex-wife. The reality of what had just happened started to sink in during the drive back to Jennifer's office. In 2 hours, I had gone from paying $4,200 per month in support and seeing my son every other weekend to paying only child support, which I was happy to pay because it was actually for Dylan, and having him live with me full-time. More importantly, Dylan would be protected from a mother who had proven she would exploit him for money without regard for the damage false diagnoses could cause to his future. I had to pick him up from school that afternoon to start our new custody arrangement, and I had no idea how to explain to a 7-year-old that his mom was in jail and he would be living with me now. Dylan took the transition better than I expected when I explained it in age-appropriate terms that his mom had made some mistakes and needed time to work on being better, so he would be staying with me for a while and seeing her at special visits. He seemed confused but not traumatized, mostly just excited that he would get to be with me every day instead of only twice a week, which broke my heart a little because it showed how much he had missed having consistent time with his father. We spent that first evening setting up his room in my apartment. I had kept it ready for his visits but now made it fully his space with all his favorite toys, books, and decorations. He chattered happily about how he could finally have his Lego sets permanently at my place instead of having to choose which ones to bring back and forth, and his innocent joy at this silver lining made me simultaneously grateful and furious at Vanessa for nearly destroying our chance at this closer relationship through her greed and fraud. That night after I tucked Dylan into bed and watched him fall asleep in his new permanent room, I stood in the doorway feeling emotions I couldn't fully articulate. Relief. Gratitude, residual anger at Vanessa, fierce protective love for my son, and determination to build the stable life he deserved with me as his primary parent who would never exploit or harm him for personal gain. The next several weeks were an adjustment period as Dylan and I built our new daily routines together, and I had to quickly learn skills I had never needed as an every other weekend dad. Morning routines of getting him ready for school, packing lunches he would actually eat, coordinating with teachers about homework and projects, managing after-school activities, cooking dinners that balanced nutrition with what a 7-year-old would tolerate. All of it was overwhelming at first, but became deeply satisfying as I realized I was finally getting to be a real full-time father instead of a visitor in my own son's life. Dylan thrived with the stability and consistency. His grades improved even though they had been fine before, and he seemed genuinely happier having daily access to both structure and fun with me. Vanessa was released from her 30-day jail sentence looking gaunt and broken, and our supervised visitations were awkward and tense affairs where she tried too hard to be the fun mom while Dylan remained polite but distant, clearly sensing something had fundamentally changed in their relationship, even if he didn't understand all the details of why. The court-ordered psychological evaluation of our family took place over 3 separate sessions with a different psychologist, Dr. Michael Torres, who was thorough and professional in his assessment of both parents and Dylan's adjustment. He observed me with Dylan in natural interactions, interviewed both of us separately, reviewed all the documentation of Vanessa's fraud, and met with Vanessa to assess her parenting capacity and judgment. His report, submitted to the court 6 weeks after I got temporary custody, was unambiguous in its recommendations. Primary physical custody should remain with me based on Dylan's positive adjustment and my demonstrated ability to prioritize his actual needs over personal interests, while Vanessa should have gradually increasing visitation contingent on completing parenting classes and therapy to address the judgment issues that led to her fraud. Mr. Hayes demonstrates appropriate parenting skills, emotional stability, and genuine focus on his son's well-being, Dr. Torres wrote. Ms. Rodriguez's willingness to fabricate mental health diagnoses for financial gain shows significant impairment in parenting judgment that requires remediation before she can be trusted with primary custody responsibilities. The report gave Judge Morrison everything she needed to make the temporary custody arrangement permanent, and at the final hearing, Vanessa didn't even contest it, just accepted defeat with visible resignation and agreed to the conditions for her supervised visitation schedule. My life transformed in ways both practical and psychological as I settled into permanent primary custody and freedom from the financial drain of unjust alimony. Without the $2,400 monthly alimony payment, I suddenly had breathing room in my budget for the first time since the divorce, and I used that financial freedom to move Dylan and me into a better 2-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood with good schools nearby. I could afford to take Dylan to movies and museums and occasional trips without agonizing over every dollar, could buy him the soccer equipment and art supplies he wanted, could actually save money for his future instead of just surviving paycheck to paycheck. But more than the financial relief, what felt transformative was the psychological freedom from being exploited and controlled through fraudulent support demands. I had spent months feeling helpless and victimized by a system that let Vanessa extract money from me while she lived comfortably and plotted to take even more. Now I understood that standing up for truth and fighting back against fraud wasn't just possible but necessary, and that sometimes justice actually did prevail when you had evidence and refused to accept being a victim. It was during this period of rebuilding and adjustment, about 3 months after getting primary custody, that I had a moment of reflection that crystallized everything I had learned from this nightmare. I was reading a book that Jennifer had recommended called Principles by Ray Dalio, a successful investor who had built his career and life around radical truth and transparency. One passage struck me with particular force as I sat in my apartment while Dylan slept peacefully in his room. Truth, or more precisely, an accurate understanding of reality, is the essential foundation for any good outcome. I read that sentence multiple times, understanding how it applied perfectly to what I had just survived. Vanessa had built her fraud on lies and false reality, betting that I wouldn't question her claims or investigate the truth. She had counted on me accepting her version of reality where Dylan was severely disordered and needed expensive interventions, where she was the struggling single mother deserving of more support, where I was the difficult ex-husband who should just pay without question. But by insisting on truth and accurate understanding of reality through investigation and evidence, I had exposed her lies and won both justice and my son. The principle was simple but powerful. Pursue truth relentlessly, build decisions on accurate understanding rather than comfortable narratives, and refuse to accept false versions of reality even when accepting them would be easier than fighting. That principle guided my thinking as I continued rebuilding my life and became the foundation for how I approached both parenting and my career. At work, I started applying the same rigorous pursuit of truth and evidence to engineering projects, questioning assumptions, and digging deeper into data rather than accepting surface-level analyses. My thoroughness led to discovering potential structural issues in a major bridge project that would have been catastrophic if not caught, and my engineering firm's leadership took notice of my attention to detail and commitment to truth over convenience. Within 6 months, I was promoted to senior project engineer with a significant raise to $165,000, recognition that validated my skills and gave me additional financial security. With Dylan, I committed to always being honest with him in age-appropriate ways, never manipulating or using him for my own purposes the way his mother had, always prioritizing his actual needs and reality over what might be convenient or beneficial for me. The contrast between my approach and Vanessa's was stark, and Dylan responded to it with trust and openness that had been strained during the custody battle. He knew I would always tell him the truth, always put his real interests first, and never exploit him for personal gain. That trust was more valuable than any custody arrangement or financial settlement could ever be. Vanessa completed her mandated parenting classes and therapy after about 6 months, and her visitation with Dylan gradually transitioned from supervised to unsupervised as she demonstrated improved judgment and stability. The woman who emerged from that process was noticeably different from the manipulative person who had forged psychological documents. Humbled, more genuine, less focused on appearances and money. During one exchange, when she picked up Dylan for a weekend visit, she asked if we could talk briefly, and I agreed cautiously, curious what she wanted to say. "I owe you a real apology for everything I put you and Dylan through," she said, her voice carrying shame rather than the fake contrition I had heard during court proceedings. I was so focused on what I thought I deserved financially, so angry about the divorce, that I lost sight of what actually mattered. I convinced myself that asking for more money was somehow justified, and when you resisted, I escalated to the point of literally forging documents and lying about our son's health. I destroyed my own credibility, went to jail, lost custody of Dylan, and worst of all, I damaged my relationship with him in ways that might never fully heal. I'm genuinely sorry for all of it. The apology seemed sincere, but I also recognized it came after she had faced severe consequences rather than before, which limited how much credit I was willing to give her for the remorse. "I appreciate the apology," I responded carefully, not wanting to be cruel, but also not ready to absolve her of accountability for choices that had nearly destroyed my life and harmed our son. "What you did was calculated fraud that could have permanently damaged Dylan's future if those false diagnoses had stuck. You were willing to label your own healthy child as disordered just to get more money from me, and that's something I'll never fully understand or forget. I'm glad you're doing better now and working on being a better parent for Dylan's sake, but our co-parenting relationship will never be based on trust again. It'll be based on legal agreements, documented communication, and constant verification of anything you claim about our son." She nodded in acceptance, looking hurt, but understanding she had earned this permanent skepticism. We would never be friendly co-parents who could casually communicate and trust each other's word. We would always be adversarial exes who shared a child and had to interact through formal channels with everything documented. That was the reality she had created through her choices, and she would live with the consequences of that diminished relationship for the rest of Dylan's childhood. The permanent custody arrangement was formalized in a final court order that gave me primary physical custody, with Dylan spending every other weekend and alternating holidays with Vanessa. A complete reversal of the original arrangement where I had been the every other weekend parent. Child support was recalculated based on the new custody split and Vanessa's income, resulting in her paying me a modest $600 monthly to contribute to Dylan's expenses, while he lived primarily with me. The irony of that reversal wasn't lost on either of us. The woman who had tried to fraudulently increase support from me to over $7,000 monthly was now the one paying support, albeit a much smaller amount, reflecting our income difference and custody split. I never raised Dylan's child support or sought more from Vanessa beyond what the calculation required, not because she deserved consideration, but because I refused to become the kind of person who exploited support systems for personal gain. I wanted exactly what Dylan actually needed and cost, nothing more and nothing less. And that principled approach meant I could look at myself in the mirror and know I was better than what she had been. Dylan grew and thrived over the following years in the stable environment I provided, and our relationship deepened in ways that wouldn't have been possible if Vanessa's fraud had succeeded and I had remained a peripheral, twice-weekly parent. By the time he was 12, he was old enough to understand more of what had happened during the custody battle, and I explained it honestly when he asked direct questions about why the arrangement had changed. He was shocked and disappointed to learn his mother had forged documents and lied about him having disorders, but he also appreciated my honesty in explaining it rather than covering up or making excuses for her behavior. "I'm glad I live with you most of the time," he told me one evening during one of our talks. "I love Mom, but I trust you more. I know you'll always tell me the truth even when it's hard, and you'll never use me for something that's not really about me." His words validated every difficult choice I had made to fight for custody and truth rather than accepting fraud for the sake of avoiding conflict. I had given Dylan something invaluable, a primary parent he could fully trust, who demonstrated integrity in action rather than just words, who showed him that pursuing truth and refusing to accept lies was worth the struggle, even when fighting felt impossible. Looking back on the entire arc from discovering Vanessa's forged psychological report to building a stable life as Dylan's primary parent, I could see how the crisis had forced me to become someone stronger and more principled than I had been before. The comfortable version of me, who had accepted being exploited through unjust alimony and limited custody, wouldn't have had the courage or tenacity to investigate, fight back, and insist on truth, regardless of consequences. That book's wisdom about truth being the essential foundation for good outcomes had proven absolutely correct. By refusing to accept Vanessa's false version of reality and instead pursuing accurate understanding through evidence and verification, I had achieved an outcome that protected my son, restored justice, and gave me financial freedom I had thought impossible. Vanessa had gambled that I would be passive and compliant, that I wouldn't question professional-looking documents or demand proof of claims that seemed suspicious. Her miscalculation of my willingness to fight for truth had cost her custody, her freedom, her credibility, and her financial scheme. Meanwhile, I had gained custody of my son, freedom from exploitation, and the knowledge that standing up for truth and refusing to be victimized by fraud was not only possible, but necessary. The forged signature that Judge Morrison had noticed was the crack that exposed Vanessa's entire web of lies. But my decision to investigate and fight, rather than accept her claims, was what actually brought justice. That lesson would stay with me forever. Never accept false versions of reality. Always pursue truth no matter how difficult, and trust that justice, while not guaranteed, becomes possible when you refuse to participate in lies.